Welcome to SCRS Talks, provided by the Society for Clinical Research Sites. Thank you for joining us as we explore the latest trends, insights, and innovations shaping clinical research today. I'm Jimmy Bechtel, the Chief Site Success Officer with SCRS, and today I'm joined by Jeff Zucker, the Chief Development Officer, and Brandon Lenfest, the Regional Director with Tekton Research, and they're here with us today to talk a little bit about the challenges in neuroscience / CNS trials. We'll probably use those terms interchangeably today, and really how we overcome the challenges at the site level with these types of research studies. But before we get into that, we'll start with some introductions from Jeff and Brandon. And well, let's start with you, Jeff. Would love to learn a little bit more about you and Tekton.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jimmy. As you said, I'm the Chief Development Officer here at Tekton, and I've been here for almost 2 years now. I came on board really to help grow the network and investigators to our sites. And my background is really in CNS, honestly. I've been in research for 30 years, and I'm a former psychotherapist. I worked at sites, I worked at sponsors, and I was in the CRO space for some time as well. And wedged in between there, I did run a phase 1 unit too. So a little bit of views from every side, but neuroscience has always been a part of my career because I love it. I love working in the space, and it's exciting and it's growing. And here at Tekton, we want to continue to grow our CNS offerings because there are a lot of exciting things going on that we definitely want to be a part of. So we're bringing on psychiatrists, we're bringing on neurologists to be able to cover what is coming up, and definitely excited for the future.
That's great. And Brandon, from you, please.
Yes, I've been in research for about 22, 23 years now. I had been with Tekton about the same time as Jeff has, but I actually worked for just a single psychiatrist for 20 of those years. So experience started as a coordinator, became a rater, became a site manager there, and moved on to Tekton, and really excited about helping to create a good CNS team here at Tekton. We're starting up all sorts of new sites, so I'm overseeing a lot of growth, and it's wonderful.
Excellent. Well, thank you both, and really excited to jump into the topic today. So I want to start by asking a little bit about the background of this conversation and the therapeutic area, and get your opinions, obviously well qualified to speak to this. Why do neuroscience or CNS trials tend to be more challenging for sites than other therapeutic areas?
Brandon and I spoke about this. I'll talk about it a little bit, and I'll let Brandon expand a little bit more. But there are complexities that come into play when we're dealing with neuroscience trials. First of all, the patient population that we're dealing with could be vulnerable population that we're dealing a lot with caregivers that we'll talk about in a little bit as well. But also the need for psychometric raters to conduct the scales that we need to do. Those are the primary outcomes. We're not taking blood tests to take a look at the primary outcomes here. We're doing these scales that professionals are administering. So having that complexity there adds a little bit to it. But Brandon, I'll let you expand a little bit more too.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The fact that these studies have soft endpoints there, we can't just draw blood to see if your depression went away. We have to have a good interview and a good quality interview, but it really starts with correct patient selection. So we need to find the right people to put into these studies so that we can get good data out from them. And so the challenges start at patient selection, but it's really hard to get good data out of people if we don't have good interviewers to be able to collect that data.
Excellent points. We know that not only are these challenges around these particular trials, but also just in general, we know that protocols and burden, the endpoints, timelines, that's all these things just become more and more challenging as we continue on our forward march with clinical studies. So I want to talk about patient identification and really hone in on what successful identification might look like in a CNS or neuroscience studies, and how that, again, might be different or contrasted with traditional recruitment approaches.
So I'm going to go ahead and start with this one. The patient identification in CNS trials, you really need to start with extensive pre-screening. You can't just bring people in off the streets who've responded to an ad and say, hey, let's put you in a research study. You need to start off and do a good phone screen, figure out what's going on with these people, what symptoms they're really experiencing.
And the model that we use here is really working with local psychiatrists, community psychiatrists, and neurologists. And these folks know their patients. And that's really key to understand. So when we're talking about a protocol, we're reviewing something, they already have people at the top of their mind that they're going to be able to bring in that are probably going to be eligible for the study. So knowing the patients is going to be key. As Brandon mentioned, some of the advertising campaigns, I remember, so like I said, I've been in the industry for quite a while, and patient recruitment has been a key portion of my experience as well. Doing the mass advertising campaigns and having hundreds of patients dial in and make appointments and things like that, the inefficiencies of that was extensive. So having extensive pre-screening talks and also, like I said, knowing the patients. But when we're advertising for patients, we want to make sure that we're talking to them beforehand and doing as much pre-screening as possible before we bring them in the door. And quite frankly, if they don't qualify, it doesn't feel good for the patient when they come in and like, or you don't qualify because A, you're not depressed enough, or you have this going on, or you have that going on. They want to know that and not sort of say waste of time to come in. It takes motivation to come into a visit like that. And we know when we're suffering from some mood disorders, motivation's not really high. So we want to make sure that we're giving them the benefit and making it as highly possible as we can that they're going to be able to enter the trial when they do come in. I think another barrier when we look and we review a protocol is, which is the burden on the patient? How long are they going to have to stay in? Taking a quick detour to psychedelic studies, that's a long commitment. They need to be there for a good portion of the day to do that. A lot of the folks that we're dealing with depression or anxiety, these are functioning people that have jobs. So we want to make sure that they have the time and they're able to commit to that to be able to fulfill the needs of the clinical trial.
Those are excellent points, Jeff and Brandon. And it's really interesting in this space because, like you've alluded to, we're not dealing with someone's diabetes, right? Or someone's, and you could name 100 different diseases, right? Where it's a little bit more cut and dry, that their ability to not only qualify for the study, but their ability to even get themselves to the research site, it can vary from day to day and week to week because we're dealing with oftentimes, as you alluded to, their psychological state. And that's a huge challenge that we see in these studies. But we know that help with that or guide or provide support, caregivers play a large role in these studies. And we know how overlooked the caregiver can tend to be in the clinical research process. So what can sites, speaking from a site to other sites, how should sites be thinking about caregiver engagement when we look into neuroscience and CNS studies?
Caregivers are really the key people for a lot of CNS studies. A lot of the problems with CNS is you have patients who have a disease of poor insight. They don't know what's going on because they're stuck in the middle of it. And so they might not even see what they're going through as a problem because it's not just a problem for them, but it's causing problems for people around them. And so the caregivers are the ones with the best insight to these people and what's going on with them. And so they're really an asset for targeting to find people for research studies, to be that motivation to get people in the door, because sometimes people won't do things for themselves, but they will do it for a loved one. And so if your spouse is telling you, hey, I think you need to be doing this, you're more likely to get into it and get it done. And so, having a involved caregiver who is able to provide good insight into the day-to-day lives of these research subjects and to be able to provide data to the principal investigators and the psychometric raters about what's really going on.
Yeah, and I think one of the big ones is Alzheimer's disease. So in my history, I've done a lot of Alzheimer's work, and really the caregivers are devastated by this. It really is painful because they've seen their spouse or significant other go through the whole spectrum of, I've seen them being fully functional and intelligent and working, and now, they can't do that. So they're devastated. They also need support. So make sure when we're at the site level and we're working there, we're also, taking care of the caregivers too. But having their report, as Brendan had said, is going to be vital there. So it's often integrated, and it's also an inclusion criteria that they need a caregiver that's going to be able to not only get them to and from the office, but also complete some rating scales that'll be done by them, and also make sure they're taking their medication and things like that. So the caregiver plays a really key role when we're talking about Alzheimer's disease. But as Brandon said, also with depression, anxiety, and other disorders too, the insight of some of these patients may not be exactly what it used to be for them. So we want somebody who's looking objectively at them and looking at their ADLs, for an example. Are they taking care of themselves? Whereas a patient may report that they are, but the caregiver is saying not so much.
Interesting points around this. And I mean, we could probably talk for hours on the role and the importance and how we support caregivers, but I think it's a really important aspect of that. And it plays into the retention perspective as well, because you both kind of alluded to the role that they play in the patient support and kind of getting them up out of bed to go do this and to participate in their visits and to keep coming back and to see the value, because we know that oftentimes in these types of trials, sometimes that self-perception is really a challenge for these patients. And it's up to that caregiver to help them, like you said explicitly, Jeff, help them realize, this is something you need to do. We need to get up, we need to go to the visit, we need to get this taken care of, and here's a way we can do it, which speaks to retention and the challenges that we face there. We know it's one of the biggest risks, especially when we look at long-term CNS studies. So what are, in your experiences, some of the most effective ways that sites can reduce patient drop-off, or rather maintain patient retention over time?
So I'll start off with informed consent. It starts right there. They have to be educated. It's all education to both the caregiver and the patient to make sure that they know what's going to happen to them during the clinical trial. When we're talking about trials like this is not something where they're going to take a pill and the next day, or maybe even the next week or the week after that, they're going to start feeling something immediately. So we need to educate them and let them know this is something that will take some time, and the importance of them to be able to come in so we can monitor them during the course of the trial. And also letting the caregiver know about that to make sure that they can motivate them to come in for sure and take their medications and things like that. A lot of times with these mood disorders, and even like you take bipolar mania, for example, someone who's experiencing a manic episode, not too keen to come down off of that mania all the time. So the compliance with medication is not all that great. So sending reminders to them, the visits more frequently, and being in contact with them and their caregiver. That goes for schizophrenia as well. But it really starts at the informed consent at the beginning of the clinical trial, where you're educating them. That's the importance and the purpose of the informed consent document. Let them know what they're getting involved with when they join up for this trial.
Yeah, it's all about setting expectations and then being able to meet those set expectations. So as a site, we need to tell the person what's involved, let them know how long the visits are really going to be so that they can budget the right amount of time. But it's also important to allow these people to not get better, to make sure that they're comfortable with just coming in for their visits and not setting or implying any expectations that something's going to change. If we can bring these people in and let them know it's okay. If you get better, great. If you don't, that's okay. In diseases like depression, people feel like a failure. And if they feel like they're failing in the study because they're not getting better, or because they're having a side effect, or they're just causing problems for the research site, they're not going to want to come back in. So you need to make sure with these people that you're keeping things consistent for them, but giving them permission to be open and honest with whatever's going on with them. I always like to keep in close contact with these people so that you're reminding them regularly about what's coming up. Hey, your next visit, it's going to be 2 hours long. This is what we're going to do. Remind them about it regularly as it's coming up to time for their next visit, and just kind of hold their hand through it as best you can. It's important that you keep consistency in their visits themselves. Don't have them just sitting around waiting for long periods of time. So always kind of keep them busy so that their time feels valuable as a part of the clinic. Doing those things just helps to keep them involved, keep them going, and get them through to the end of the study. I always love studies where there is something for the research participants at the end of the study, whether it's an open label extension phase, or one of the things the doctor I worked with did in the past was free aftercare. These people in CNS studies, they want to get better. And we can't promise that in research studies, but if we can give them something to hope for, it keeps them involved and keeps them going through the study to the end.
Great points, guys. And what I really took away from that is we know that the level of care that we give patients in clinical trials is just a little bit more, we'll say, VIP than traditional medical care. That's part of the experience, the attention that they get. But it sounds to me like the level of empathy and care that we need to put ourselves into for particularly those in CNS or neuroscience-based studies is that much higher. If you don't have some level of ability as a coordinator or some patient-facing care team member at a site or at an ancillary service, you're going to have a challenge maintaining and really getting on the same level as these patients. We need to make sure we're meeting the needs of this population is, again, that level of empathy and care that might be just a few notches higher than some other types of research studies where it's important, of course, but the level of need around that might be just a little bit different.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I think the one thing that we want to make sure we're keeping an eye on and we're looking out for is the placebo response rate. We want to support these patients. We want to help them as best we can to help get through the visits and do everything they need to do at home and things like that. But we need to be hyper vigilant in looking at that we're not producing a placebo response, over communicating with them and things like that, or, the difference between clinical treatment and our research. I mean, research, we have to tell our physicians and the physicians have to know, and PIs do know this. They don't have free reign to do what they want to do, start a new therapy or start doing more psychotherapy, things like that during the course of the trial. They have to stick to the protocol to make sure that we're diminishing the placebo response as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, Jeff, that's spot on. Placebo response can kill studies. And so, yes, we need to be empathetic. Yes, we need to do what we can, but we have to make sure we're always keeping that placebo response in mind. We don't want to be the highlight of someone's day is coming to the research study because it's getting them out of the house and they don't get out of the house except for that. So we need to always keep that in mind as we're going through, to be compassionate, to be considerate of them, but also to make sure we're maintaining that distance so that we are producing the best results for the studies.
It's such a challenge because, one could easily make the argument that those things are in a way counterintuitive to each other. And so I imagine that that's really difficult, finding that balance and establishing that and finding a way to work to make sure that we're maintaining, like you said, you said, Brandon, our distance, yet also recognizing the signs and some of those empathetic types of actions or traits that are essential to a CNS study. So, kind of, again, speaking to the complexity of patient care in these types of trials. But for sites that feel hesitant to maybe take on CNS studies, what advice might you give them to succeed or to make the decision around if a CNS study might be something that's right for them?
Yeah, I think for sites that are already doing clinical research, let's take that example where they're already doing research. Maybe they're a general practitioner, and obviously general practitioners these days are seeing a lot of mood disorders, even mild cognitive impairment, things like that, where there's a lot of research work going on. They're already conducting trials, so they have a study coordinator and they have a lab, so the logistics are set up. But it takes a lot more than that when we're talking about CNS trials. Specifically, what we spoke about earlier are the psychometric raters. They are key. They're the primary outcome that are what sponsors are looking for, trained and seasoned psychometric raters on site. So don't go into it blindly and have your typical research nurse or your typical or your typical sub-investigator or other physician assume that they'll be able to do these psychometric scales. Get somebody on board who has been doing it for some time. And also be prepared for the length of the visits. I know in other indications are high lengths of visits as well. But if you're not used to that, these visits can be longer. And there's a higher burden on the site and being able to spend more time with the patient at each visit to make sure that they're completing everything they need to do. And for sites who are not doing research, we're talking about a neurology site, clinical site, taking on any research, and regardless of the therapeutic area, it's a big thing to take on. And that's why at Tekton, what we do is we work with physicians like that who may have some experience in research, may have a lot of experience in research, or may not have any experience in research, but want to get involved in research. It is a big thing to take on to do that. So having your nurse serve as a study coordinator, or your receptionist serve as, a person that's scheduling patients and calling patients, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. I believe the number is around 75% of physicians who take on a clinical trial only do one, and they never do another one again. So what we do at Tekton is take that burden off, and we really do a lot of the operational things. So it leaves the PI to be able to be the PI, looking after the safety, looking after the efficacy, looking after the protocol adherence for the whole study. So it's a challenge, the shift from non-psychiatric or non-CNS trials to CNS trials, mostly because I think of the raters. And also having a study coordinator who is well-versed in CNS trials is going to be key as well. To be able to have that conversations with CRAs and other representatives at the sponsor. The CRA, more likely than not, that's going to come into your office, they're going to be CNS experienced. So you need to be able to speak their language and talk the same way.
And I'm going to add something in here just about the placebo response, since we've been talking about that. Placebo response is a whole office responsibility. So some advice to people who are trying to get into CNS studies is you need to make sure not just the research staff is aware, but the entire clinical staff, everyone from the front desk, everyone who might be interacting with someone. You need to make sure that they are aware not to be overly friendly with these research participants. We have to be as neutral as possible to not let that placebo response or the possibility of placebo response kill the data.
Actually, one thing I didn't mention, I look for this. So, the one thing I look for when we're looking to add a physician investigator to our network is I need them to be motivated. I want them to be excited. I want them to be on board with doing clinical research at their sites. And for sites that are shifting to CNS, in addition to the other trials that they're doing, the whole office needs to be on board with conducting CNS trials. It's really the key. If they're not engaged, it's just not going to work.
Thank you both so much. A lot of great points and a lot of tips for anyone looking to be into CNS. It's no small task. It sounds like a challenge for sure. And there's lots of nuance and aspects of CNS neuroscience studies that require a site to really think through. So thank you for sharing some insight in just a couple of minutes on what that might need to look like. So thank you both for your time today and for sharing a little bit about what you all do and the space of CNS and some of the challenges we face, but importantly, how we overcome some of those challenges and some of the things that you do to really meet the patients where they are and serve them in the best way possible. So again, thank you both for being here today.
Thank you, Jay.
I hope you check out other great site-focused resources made available to our entire community on our website, myscrs.org, including other podcasts, webcasts, and tools and guides that are made for the site community. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time.